The bassoon is one of the double reed instruments. And that means that there are actually two pieces of reed tied together with string and wire in a particular form, just like these two young ladies have here. But they're put together with two pieces of wire that you can see and one that you can't see. And then when that's all put together and firmed up and dried out and then re-moistened again, then they put this little bitty cord on the thing. And there's a reason behind that cord. You can't imagine what it is. It's very practical. That means if you drop the reed, it ends on the butt end, not the business end. It's a very nice thing to have happen. This,
like a badminton
right, exactly, very much so. This cane is the same cane that the single reed players use and all the oboe players use. It's called Arundo Donax. The state of California has designated Arundo Donax as a noxious weed and is in the process of killing off all the good cane fields in California.
Seriously?
It's true.
What?
Really? More expensive? It's already $13.
It's politicians.
It's already $13.
We were just talking about it.
Yeah. Most of the very best reed cane comes from a particular province of France called the Var province, V-A-R. And there's whole families that have done nothing more than raise cane, no pun intended, for generations. And all the very best double reed players and single reed players in America used to make pilgrimages at the time of harvest over to France to pick out their cane because it's so hard to get uniform cane. Every reed player will tell you that it's almost impossible to find two single reeds that'll play the same. There are single reed players, clarinet players in particular, that say, well, if it isn't right out of the box, I'm going to throw it away. And they'll get out of a box of 20 reeds, they'll get 2 or 3 usable reeds and throw the rest away. It's true. Would I lie to you?
Well,
That's a rhetorical question. So the bassoon originally started out as a very simple instrument, and bassoon players soon discovered that an instrument that has to be long enough to play the low notes is unwieldy to play. So some smart person decided, oh, let's just wrap it around itself. So it starts here and goes around here and comes back here. So you've saved 3 extra feet of hanging around your neck or sitting on the seat strap. This is sealed, and this material is all brass or other non-rust material because it's subject to a great deal of moisture. It used to be, you can see that this side, the small side of the bassoon, is lined with brass, and the upper joint is lined with hard rubber. And that's so that you don't have rotting problems, you don't have cracking problems, you don't have water problems in there. There are some really wonderful older bassoons that are permanently ruined because somebody hasn't cleaned them out religiously. Because you can't, this is maple, it's the only woodwind instrument that is made of something other than a really hard wood. Maple is pretty hard, but when you compare it to grenadilla, anyway, starting in World War II, when the Germans were out to conquer the world, they conquered Africa first. And that's where African blackwood or grenadilla wood was raised. So consequently, the U.S. had to come up with substitutions. There it is. This is grenadilla. This is an instrument from the 1950s, back when grenadilla next became available to this country, right after World War II. And so far, knock on wood, this instrument hasn't cracked. So the bassoon, as you notice, has several open, straight through the wood holes, finger holes. Some keys are there because it's necessary that you don't end up stretching your fingers so wide. But when you put it together, you end up with a big long tube that the pitch of the instrument is developed from the total length. And I can take off this top bell and not change the length of the pitch unless you get really down low. But it doesn't affect most of the rest of the instrument. But once you start getting past that, then it gets really hard to get anything out of the instrument. This is an oboe reed, and it's two pieces of cane put onto a brass staple. You can see inside the solid brass. Sometimes nickel silver is used for more expensive reeds and more stable vocals. And then corks put on the outside so that it can fit inside the reed in an airtight manner. Bassoons have a vocal as well, except that this vocal is much longer. And if the reed is made correctly, then it fits exactly on the vocal and it's airtight. If you've made the reed wrong, then it isn't airtight and it doesn't play. The bassoon is different than every woodwind instrument in that it doesn't really have an octave key. Flute doesn't either, but flute overblows. The bassoon doesn't overblow, but this little bitty vent in the vocal, which doubles the cost of the vocal, is what puts a little bitty air vent in the tone production and makes it go up an octave. So the bassoon is totally different from all the other woodwind instruments in that if you want to go up an octave, you don't press an octave key. You don't have one, first of all. But what you do is raise your thumb. That is the hardest thing when you're doubling instruments to get used to. Because if you want to go up an octave on a saxophone or a clarinet or an oboe, you just push down on the octave key. On the bassoon, you raise the thumb. It's just totally backwards. The bassoon is, as I said, the most archaic woodwind instrument. It's the one that has been improved least. But still, by having all of this ancient history, it has 5+ octaves, all the way from, which is every bit of this length. And that's a low B flat concert. And it goes from there, maybe, plus another octave above, which is, it's a totally different sound for the instrument. It sounds like a total different instrument when you go way high on the bassoon. And the other thing is that the fingerings are not consecutive. So when you get up high, all the notes require the movement of 2 or 3 fingers to make it work. There's a wonderful book that's published for all bassoon players. It's a big oversized book, and it's that thick. And it's called Essentials of Bassoon Technique. And it's about $160, because it's only published by the University of Michigan. And it's nothing but fingering for the instrument. For example, on middle C here, I think, if my memory is correct, there's 6 different fingerings for that note. And it goes through the whole scale of 4.5 octaves that way. And it's just, there's fingerings for a particular passage or a trill that make it really difficult. For example, there's a lot of finger movement to get from those 2 notes, but there's cheats. The flute and the clarinet especially don't have a lot of cheats. The saxophone has almost none, because they're well-engineered instruments that are modern. The bassoon is not modern. It's archaic, which means that bassoonists can be cranky old guys like me. Any questions?